So as we transition to the second day portion of the conference. Again, we have another exciting full day of conference ready for you, so prepare yourself. I am honored to introduce, I don't know if there's this, yeah, okay. I am honored to introduce our plenary speaker of the day, Dr. Donald Sadoway. He is a professor of material chemistry emeritus in the Department of Material Science and Engineering at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And 8 years ago, when I was a younger engineer, I was in this room at the COM in 2015, listening to his keynote speeches, and I remember to be very inspired. I was younger, but I certainly come out being inspired to go out and do something and make a difference. So I hope he'll continue to inspire you today. Dr. Sadoway will discuss the electrometallurgical pathways towards profitable sustainability. He completed his bachelor's degree in engineering science and PhD in chemical metallurgy from the University of Toronto. He then joined the MIT faculty in 1978. He is an author of over 180 scientific papers, an inventor on over 37 US patents, and his research is directed towards batteries for grid-scale storage and electric vehicles, and towards environmentally sound metals extraction technologies. His accomplishments include the invention of the liquid metal battery for large-scale stationary storage, and the invention of molten oxide electrolysis for carbon-free steel production. So he is a founder of 6 companies: Ambry, and Boston Metal, Lunar Resources, Avanti Battery, Pure Lithium, and Sadoway Labs. He's as much about inventing inventors as it is about inventing technology. He gives many lectures, and his online videos of his chemistry lectures, hosted by the MIT OpenCourseware, extend his impact on engineering education far beyond the lecture hall. And it's viewed more than 2.4 million times, and so is his TED Talk. In 2012, he was named by Time Magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. And please welcome Dr. Sadoway.
Well, good morning. Thank you for those kind words. And I, too, was younger 8 years ago. Axiomatically, everybody in this room was younger 8 years ago. It's funny how that works. So I'm going to talk today about sustainability. And I want to talk about it from a slightly different perspective, and that is that I don't hear enough about profitability. In fact, what I hear more about is that we're going to have to make sacrifices, and we're going to have to do with less, and we're going to be impoverished. And I don't like that. And I think everybody in this room has the capacity to continue to maintain our standard of living and do so in a sustainable manner, and also to do it in a way that is profitable. So let's take a look. So I like to pace, because as a lecturer, I never was potted at a lectern. So I will pace. So I think that when we talk about a sustainable future, that's carbon-free, and I think that means electric. And that means we're going to have to electrify everything. And so that's going to take radical innovation in some very risk-averse sectors. I mean, many sectors of our society and industry, they detest uncertainty, and this is a time of great uncertainty. We know we have to get rid of, but we're not sure about whether the proposed substitutes are really going to work at scale and profitably. So this is going to require some major invention, and this is going to be resource intensive, and it touches the things that people in this room are familiar with. It touches on mining and touches upon smelting. And we're going to have to do it in a different way, because in the 21st century, a lot of the technology, which is very mature, works beautifully, works profitably by the old rules, is going to be harder and harder to get permitted because of the demands on water, on energy, and the emissions. And so we're actually being asked to build the 21st century world with new technology that we're simultaneously trying to invent. We're not allowed to use yesterday's technology to bridge us over to the better world. And that's a really tall order. And the other thing I want to remind people of is that, and by the way, most of what I'm telling you, you already know. There's the Roman poet Juvenal who said, men need not so much be informed as reminded. And I'm going to tell you, you already know that, but we're just going to say it to each other one more time. We'll feel good about it. And so what we're talking about in this room is tough tech. And tough tech, it's not like writing code. And that's why a lot of the commentary about how the private sector is going to rush in, there's so much money to be made in the green transition and so on. That's not true, because private investment wants a turnover in 3 to 5 years. And that's okay if we conceive of an app that's going to allow you to upload pictures, more easily, or share some thought about, you're in the kitchen, you made some pasta. It's really great that you can share that instantly. But when we're talking about changing world steel, that's tough tech. That's minimum 20 years from inception to deployment at scale. And no private investment has the patience to go 20 years. And what I'm learning right now, even with some of the companies that I've been working on, the private sector is now loath to invest in companies pre-revenue. So how am I supposed to get from here to revenue? Once I have revenue, I don't need the investment. I can go to the bank. Why am I going to sell equity? So there's this catch-22 situation here. It's tough. But I'm not going to leave you with a downer note. I didn't come here to just depress everybody. I came here to spread joy. And I'm going to do that, all right? So I'm going to give you 3 vignettes. And the first one's about decarbonization manufacturing. That's going to be green steel. And that's going to get into Boston Metal. And I'm just talking about these from the standpoint of the epilogue. I'm not here as a shill. I'm trying to drum up business for companies. I don't do that. In fact, I didn't even want to get involved in companies. My students dragged me kicking and screaming to form the first company with the liquid metal battery, because I said, getting involved as a professor with companies is corrupting, it's bad. And they said to me, Sadoway, you talk about science and service to society. You cannot change society by simply publishing papers. If you want to change society, you have to get the technology out there into the marketplace. And I said, okay, you got me. And that's why I started. My students taught me. All right, so the second and third vignettes are in the area of treating the intermittency of renewables, wind and solar. And that means you need massive stationary storage, and it's not lithium ion. People who deploy lithium ion at 100, 200 megawatt hour facilities are, in my opinion, irresponsible. But it doesn't matter. I don't care what private money does. They'll all lose their money. It really saddens me, though, to see government funds going into those kinds of installations. So we're going to talk about liquid metal battery and Ambry, and then the most recent thing, which is the aluminum-sulfur battery. And as we all know, it's aluminium is the correct UPAC name. And by the way, if you take the time to look up the patent by Charles Martin Hall in 1886, it was aluminium. It's aluminium everywhere throughout the patent. And somewhere after he started the company, Charles Martin Hall actually started the Pittsburgh Reduction Company that became Alcoa. This is his mousy guy in the 1880s, not the 1980s, not the 20-teens, 1880s, he starts a company. And then somewhere along the way, they started calling it aluminum. So it's aluminum here, but I'll say aluminium. We're bilingual, aluminium, aluminum, it's okay. All right, so let's talk about steel. So we know that in 2022, it was almost 2 billion tons of steel produced. This is virgin metal. Forget about the electric arc remelting and stuff like that. There are business gurus that say the electric arc furnace changed steel. Well, yes, it did, but it didn't change the front end. All the virgin metal comes from ore through blast furnace, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's the way it was. And that generated about 3.6 gigatons of CO2, which is almost 10% of world CO2. Not 10% of the CO2 that came from the manufacturing sector. 10% of world CO2 came from steel. If steel were a country, it would be the third largest polluter. Number 1 is China. Number 2 is United States. Number 3 would be Republic of Steel. That's how big it is. That's why it's in the crosshairs of regulators. So I started thinking about this in the 1980s when nobody cared about CO2. Why was I thinking about it? I've already been working on inert anodes for the aluminum Hall-He roll process. And I started thinking about it, well, why just aluminum? And I started thinking about iron, and I eventually came up with molten oxide electrolysis. So I always do this stuff canonically. You know? There's this assumption that the reason that professors do research and teach, and then of course serve on committees, that's the part I don't miss about retiring from MIT. I don't miss committee. You know, committee, there's a definition of committee. Committee is and I hope I don't offend people here, but it doesn't matter. You know, tenure means never having to say you're sorry, and retirement means you can say anything you want. And so a committee is a life form with at least 6 legs and no brain. That's cruel, isn't it? I'll be gone in about an hour, don't worry. So anyway, so the prevailing wisdom is that the professor does research and teaches because on the basis of the research, that would inform the professor and trickle down into the curriculum. And so that's what the engine that propels curriculum. And there may be some truth to that, but I can tell you from my personal experience, it's the inverse. It's because I taught. And not because I taught advanced classes in metallurgy. It's because when I got to MIT, I found myself in this class that is an institute-wide requirement of chemistry. All the undergraduates have to take math, physics, chemistry, and biology. And I knew no chemistry because I had a Canadian metallurgical education, which means the chemistry that we were taught started with thermodynamics. We were never taught electronic structure and bonding. And when I started teaching that class, I had to learn that. And with that, I got so much, my mind, my eyes open, my mind open, and I was able to invent again. So it was the teaching that informed my inventive capacity as a researcher. And I'll tell you another one that's inverse. You know, we in our lab classes would teach students how to write. They'd write reports, and then we teach them to write in the format, the genre of, say, a scientific paper. And so we said it's the science that drives the science that drives the writing. And I said, no. Along the way, I learned the inverse. I learned the inverse that for many years, I just published in the various metallurgical journals and so on and so forth. And a lot of my work is electrochemistry, so the Journal Electrochemical Society, and things like that. And so roundabout in the early 2000s, say around 2010, 2011, we started doing the work on the liquid metal battery. I started thinking, you know, we're going higher. We're not aiming high enough. So everything I sent to science came back. When I sent a paper to science, I'd look at my watch and I'd say, give it 48 hours. It'd just come back rejected like that, you know. But I sent to Nature. And this is going back in 2010. They didn't touch applied science very much. But we got a paper in there, and I was really happy. I don't care. You know what tenure means, never having to say you're sorry? I don't have to publish. But it launches the careers of the young people. And for those young people, that paper in Nature got them off to a really powerful springboard. So I said, okay, I will write. And so along the way, at some point I would say, I think this discovery is nature worthy. So what do we do about it? We immediately sketch out what should be the elements of a paper that is going to survive the grilling, arduous scrutiny of review at Nature. First, just to get past the editorial board, to even be sent out for review is an accomplishment. And then it goes out to review, and people get out their sharpest knives, and the stuff comes back, and it's just bleeding all over the place. Right? So how do I anticipate that? Guess what happened? The fact that we were preparing for a paper in a top-tier journal informed our science. And our science got better, not because we better publish or we're going to get fired. No, because we wanted to publish excellent work. Publish less and make it the best. And don't fill the literature with what John Eliot used to say to me, letters to mother. Most of the stuff you read on a CV is letters to mother. I know it's cruel, but guess what? I don't care. All right, so because of all this, I knew a little bit of electronic structure and bonding. So I knew that iron is found in nature as the oxide. I know there's some sulfides, blah, blah, blah. But anyways, it's hematite, magnetite, what have you. And I also know that the electron can be a reducing agent. In fact, the electron is the reducing agent. You know the blast furnace? You know how iron oxide is reduced to iron? By electron transfer. The only function of carbon is to give the electrons. That's all. It's just the electrophore. Iron goes in as 3+, it comes out as a neutral. Where did it get its electrons from? It got its electrons from carbon. Everything in metallurgy is electron transfer. All right, so I know that I know these two facts. So because I was teaching this big chemistry class, I knew that like dissolves like. And when you put these three ideas together, you get molten oxide electrolysis. Because you've got a solid oxide feedstock, you need a molten oxide as the solvent. Because you've got an electron that's sustainably produced, and you want to do chemical work, that means it's going to be electrochemistry. So there it is. It's so simple. In retrospect, I muddled through this 25 years ago. All right, so there it is. And this would give you something that is a cousin of molten salt electrolysis, which we know. That's how we produce aluminum. That's industrial, and it's at scale. And that would be disruption. So this is what the cell looks like, an anode at the top, cathode at the bottom. Now, the orange zone is the molten oxide. You feed in iron oxide there. By the action of electric current, you produce iron, which pools at the bottom down here. And at the top, you've got oxygen bubbles coming off. There it is, sustainable, good. And it turns out that the capital cost of this, when normalized, is cheaper than the capital cost of conventional technology, because you don't just run a blast furnace. You need pelletizing, you need coke ovens, you need the basic oxygen furnace. You don't need any of this here. Iron ore goes in, liquid metal comes out. And, pardon me, you know, if you're going to build an integrated steelworks this year, it better be 2 million tons at least, and this thing will scale at probably about 100,000 tons. So all that looks favorable. All right, so the research at MIT was challenging because if you take molten iron oxide, it's an electronic conductor, and that's no good for Faradaic processing. So that was a challenge. And then, of course, all this is predicated on an inert anode, and you can't use platinum group metals because that's going to be too expensive. So other than those two things, it looks attractive. So there were some challenges. And this is, pardon me, some early work downstairs at MIT. This is probably 6-inch diameter. It's an alumina tube. It's a cell down. It's beneath the field of view. It's probably down in here somewhere. Molybdenum disilicide windings and so on. And this thing's running at about 1,600 degrees. And this is just looking down the top. And you can see the oxygen bubbles coming off the anode, and then on the other side, on the cathode over here, this is a molybdenum plate, and the iron is forming, dripping down. It's a silicate melt. It's modified. I mean, there's alumina, some calcium, and so on and so forth. All the stuff that you know about lime-silica ratio, all that stuff comes in. You got to worry about viscosity and optical basicity and so on. So that's what got us started. But then came the discovery of the practical inert anode with Antoine Alenor, who was a postdoc, came to me from Arcelor in Nancy. And during that first couple of years when he was with me, we discovered this iron chromium alloy. And this is some of the early work. This is the pristine material. This is after some time in the bath. And it doesn't look terribly well. That's because the drag out of some of the silicate. But if that thing didn't stand up, it would be gone. In 2.5 hours at 1600 degrees, it would melt like a popsicle. So, and that was a paper. And that was a paper that now Antoine is a full professor at MIT, a colleague in my department. And he didn't get there because he came from France and he worked at Arcelor. He got there because of this kind of a level of academic performance. So we started a company in 2012. There was Antoine Eleanor, Jim Yurko, who is a protege of mine. And we started this company, which is now Boston Metal, and is on the path to upscaling the technology. We had to design the very first self-heating cell. It had never been done before. And everything we know about Hawley rule doesn't apply. Hawley rule runs at about 960 degrees. It's a molten fluoride electrolyte. What's the dominant form of heat transfer at 960? Conduction. What's the dominant form of heat transfer at 1600? Radiation. Everything, all of your intuition is wrong. And boy, we made a lot of mistakes and eventually built this thing with self-heating. And by the way, you can't get on your computer and type in inertanodemanufacturing.com. No one makes these things. So we had to invent not only the anode, but the manufacturing of same. It was so hard. And now we've got to design a multi-anode cell. You know the journey with Elysis. Elysis, fantastic story. I'm so proud of those people because I knew the guys at Alcoa, and they had the backing with the partnership with Rio Tinto and so on, and now they've launched Elysis. It's very, very important. And they, too, had the double task. They have the inert anode, but they had to also manufacture the inert anode. You don't get online and buy these things. So it's a long journey. All right, so the hope of Boston Metal is to make better metal, higher purity, zero emissions, of course, at a lower price point than the legacy metal. When I hear people talk about we're going to make steel with hydrogen, it's going to be 60% premium, that's a failed technology. You should make it better at the price point or lower than today's price point. Otherwise, it's failed. And by the way, no subsidies. I do not accept government subsidy. It's a sign of failure. Stop doing this. You should be able to stand on your hind legs. Government, I took government money only at the university for the exploratory, very early stage. But once it goes off campus, the notion the government is supporting this stuff, it saddens me. I don't care what they're doing in China. China can do whatever they want. But I don't like that. I have the self-respect not to take government funding in my companies. And this is going to lead to disruption if I have all those points. And I want to show you the face of disruption. This is one of our steel workers, Amanda. She's a young woman, probably in her late 20s. That's disruption. All right, let's go on. Time's flying. I'm going to jump over most of this anyway. So let's talk about stationary storage. And this is another big idea. So I wanted, around 2005, to address the problem of stationary storage. And lithium-ion was wrong, wrong, wrong. It still is wrong. It's a 30-year-old technology. It was invented for this, for handheld devices. It wasn't even invented to go into cars. The notion you got a 100 kilowatt-hour pack with volatile flammable electrolyte. I mean, the question you got to ask yourself, as Clint Eastwood says, do you feel lucky? Well, do you? So I wanted to invent something different, and I said, one of the problems with lithium-ion, not to mention safety, is its cost. It's unacceptably high priced, even after 30 years. And so I said, well, price, you got to address that on day one. And that's a different research paradigm from what we have in the universities. University research paradigm is invent the coolest chemistry, publish in the top-tier journals, and maybe you flip out a company, and people in the company will figure out how to go down the cost curve. And they will, but not in this sector, because you're competing against hydrocarbons. It's not battery versus battery. I can crush any battery, but I can't compete against hydrocarbons. They're just so good. That's why we use them. They are the best form of fuel. Highest energy density, highest power density. The only reason we're moving away from this is because of the CO2 piece. If it weren't for the CO2 piece, no one would go to electric vehicles. It doesn't make any sense. So I said, well, if the research paradigm in the university is tilted in favor of cool stuff that's unscalable, I got to break that paradigm. So I said, we talk about cost on day one. That's why I call it cost-informed discovery. I put out the periodic table, and I just go through with big magic marker, just slash out big swaths of it and say, you, to my students, you are forbidden to go to these parts of the periodic table because these elements do not exist in adequate abundance. They're too expensive. And the price point, you can use platinum for the jewelry market, fine. But don't tell me you're going to put platinum as a constituent of an automobile. You can do it. You can say whatever you want, but good luck. So that's what cost-informed discovery is. So I said, you know, you only use earth-abundant elements. You want to make something dirt cheap, then you make it out of dirt. Dirt that's locally sourced, because then you have a secure supply chain. One thing COVID taught us is globalization is wrong. The global length supply chains is just it's so cute. Oh, if only humanity were that way. It doesn't work. So you want stuff that's locally sourced. So, and make it easy to manufacture. So you got to pose the right question. You see this? It says colossal cheap storage device. You don't see the word battery in there, do you? Because if I put the word battery there, immediately I think, oh, right circular cylinder, about the size of a AA. Now, how do I make it the size of this room? Stupid. Go in the wrong direction. I just want something big that stores electricity. And by the way, disregard the experts. If you're going into a deeply entrenched field, the experts are they're just real negatrons, you know. Anything you say to them, they say, oh, that's been done. Oh, that won't work. You're crazy. Oh, I know that, but I don't need them to tell me I'm crazy. So I looked outside the field for inspiration. And this is where it comes to this audience. I went to electrometallurgy, modern electrometallurgy. Here's an aluminum smelter. This is Alouette, just downriver from here in Quebec. And it traffics in huge amounts of electricity, 24/7. I don't know how many 100,000 amperes at 4 volts, some gigawatt continuously. And I look at this thing and I say, man, if I could teach that thing not to consume electricity, but to store electricity, give it back on demand, at the end, I know I'd have something big and cheap. Everybody else starts with something that works as a storage device, is tiny, and tries to figure out how to make it the size of this smelter. You see, you ask the right question, you go with the right approach, and you go with the wrong approach. And, you know, a brilliant answer to a poorly posed question doesn't take you anywhere. Anyway, so I look, you know, by the way, you run that smelter and you go from dirt to metal for 50 cents a pound. That's big and cheap. That's a miracle, modern electrometallurgy. Anyway, so I call this invasive electrochemistry. You know, I brought everything I know from Hawley rule to batteries. And then I say, okay, there's the liquid metal battery. You've got 3 layers. You've got liquid metal. It could be magnesium on the top. It could be antimony on the bottom and molten salt in between. Everybody in this room understands what I just put on the board. I say this to anybody else. They don't know what molten salt is. They never heard of antimony. You know, how are we supposed to communicate to people? They missed a day of school. You know, I look at them and I say, "You didn't study." You know. So anyway, so this is the first conceptualization of liquid metal battery. On discharge of magnesium goes to magnesium ion. The electrons go through the external circuit. The magnesium goes down to the antimony, and then takes 2 electrons and then alloys with the antimony. The top layer gets thinner, the bottom layer gets thicker. There's no membranes, there's no separators. It generates joule heat desirably. That's the enemy for lithium ion. This thing generates heat, say 8 hours charge, 8 hours rest, 8 hours discharge. You run that thing, self-heating, self-perpetuating. So when you charge the battery, you're essentially running an electrorefinery. Everybody in this room knows what an electrorefinery is. We're very close. And I showed you magnesium, but because again, I taught first-year chemistry, so all the electropositive elements, they can be on the top, and all the electronegative elements can be on the bottom. I want the worst metal against the best metal. But I don't want nonmetals, because nonmetals are not electronically conductive. And there was a paper in Nature. Pardon me. Yeah, that was good. So that's where we started, David Bradwell and Louis Ortiz. We called it the Liquid Metal Battery Corporation. It's a terrible name, but all the catchy names were taken. So we named it something. And then we named it Ambry, because I'd heard that Cisco Systems was named Cisco Systems because it was founded in San Francisco. And I said, well, I did this in Cambridge, so I took front and back off of Cambridge. And Ambry.com was still available, so I took that as an omen. And I got the Series A funding from Bill Gates, because Bill had been watching my chemistry lectures online. Because by 2002, I'd taken over the majority of the freshman class, and there was no auditorium big enough to hold it. So they started recording the lectures, and then they would put them on closed-circuit TV, and then by 2005, the web had this video streaming capability, and then they went public when a couple of my colleagues said, let's found open courseware. They went to the president of MIT, says, let's put everything that we do in education on the web for free for the entire world. And he says, what? That's what we said. Everything we do on the web for free for the entire world. And they did it. And they came to me and said, would you let us show your recordings? And I said, yeah, I guess so. And they did. And that's how Bill started watching my lectures. And so it was probably August, right around this time, August of 2009. He'd stepped down as CEO of Microsoft. And I got an email from a woman who said she was his executive secretary, and he was coming to Boston on the 25th of September. Would I have 90 minutes to meet with him? I disregarded the email. Because I thought the students had hacked into my account. And I said, I'm not that stupid, you know. So I didn't answer. And she wrote again about 10 days and said, maybe you didn't see this, but Mr. Gates really wants to see you. And I showed this to a few of my colleagues, and they said, I think this is real. So I wrote to her and said, would you mind telling me what this is about? And then he jumped in, and he's very detailed in about 4 points and paragraphs and so on. So I met him, and eventually he became our first sponsor, and then the French energy giant Total. And that's how we got started. So I can tell that story in mixed company. So today it's 13 years old. You can't have a 13-year-old startup. It's 13 years old. And it's still just on the cusp. It's nearly died several times. Microsoft is the first customer. And they're buying it real. It's not government subsidized. They really want to put this with their servers and go green. And then Xcel Energy also. The order book, see, in this risk-averse sector, nobody wants to be first. Nobody wants to be first to buy these batteries because they don't know if Ambry's even going to be around. So they're all sitting around. Yeah, we're green. We're in the green transition. No, you're not. Huh? So once Microsoft announced, the order book fills up. It's over $8 billion now on the order book. And you know, Ambry is having trouble getting funded right now because all the big investors say, you're pre-revenue. I got an order book with $8 billion in the order book, and they're saying, it's still pre-revenue. This is the modern world. So don't let people tell you that there's this tsunami of investment. That's a lie. It's a lie. For what? For what? Cat photos? I don't know. Just not for this. You know? So, yeah, I hope that they make it. And so we're almost out of time. So I'm gonna jump. I was going to tell you about the aluminum-sulfur battery. But the only thing I want to say about it is this is a different chemistry. It operates at lower scale. The liquid metal doesn't operate until you get over 10 megawatt hours because you have to have enough to generate enough heat. I wanted something that works at smaller. And so I'm going to jump. There's an image here. So I said, what's the most abundant metal? It's not iron, it's aluminum. And what's the most abundant non-metal? It's sulfur. I said, those are my bookends. And then I say to my group, find an electrolyte. That's your task. And so this is aluminum-sulfur, blah, blah, blah. And we looked at polymers. We looked at ionic liquids, which are useless because they're too expensive. And then I'm a battery guy. I'm wearing two hats. I'm wearing my battery hat, and then I go to my metallurgy hat, and I look at the electroplating literature. The electroplating literature for electroplating aluminum, it's full of all this gorgeous science on chloroaluminate melts. And no one connects the dots between electroplating and battery chemistry. I don't know why. I guess because I once had the CEO of BHP this close to investing in Boston Metal in the early days. It was 2011. And he says, so I've answered all his objections. He says, so why don't we go forward? He says, well, I can't possibly do this. I said, why not? He says, BHP is not a metals company. What? You choose not to be a metals company. We live in prisons of our own construction. Do you know this guy Bezos? He started this thing called Amazon to sell books, right? And he's selling books. And one day someone says to him, dude, you have the infrastructure for delivering products. You could be selling ladies' shoes. You could be selling fans. You could be selling canned food. Did he say, let's do it? He says, oh, I couldn't possibly do that. Why not? I'm a bookseller. This imprisonment is so, I don't know, I can't describe it. So anyways, I took the chance and I looked at electroplating and I imported it back, and as I did with liquid metal battery, go back and forth. The collective knowledge in this room, you've got the ability to go and invent all the way through in this sector. Anyway, so we won't have time for this. Let's jump over this, quick. These are the chloroaluminates, catenation, beautiful science, but we don't have time for this. So anyways, this operates below 100 degrees C. Yeah. Molten salt, not ionic liquid. A true inorganic molten salt operating at 65 degrees Celsius. Yes, don't give me the ternary eutectic, lithium, sodium, potassium at 350 degrees. You didn't study. All right, the price point is 5% that of lithium ion and cannot catch fire. And 100% sourced in North America. No China, no Congo. Two important points. All right, so anyway, so we started the company. Paper in Nature, again. 1 year ago at this time, literally, look at August 24th of last year, published. Yeah, nice. So I started another company, Avanti, and we're starting to do it. All right, so I'm going to end with another prediction. And you just have to wait. I like the guys that make predictions about what's going on in the Earth's crust. It's perfect. You can't validate it. You can't criticize them. You just say whatever you want. Anyway, so I'm going to predict the future. Almost all industrial chemistry will become industrial electrochemistry. And all the thermal chemistry will become electrically heated. We're not going to burn gas. That's the thing. That's the idea. I don't know if it'll happen. So there's a bright future in electrochemistry and a bright future in electrometallurgy. Really. So if you put the two of those together, the way I gave you some examples, then you can fuse science and service to society with profitable sustainability. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Sadoway. Another very inspirational talk. And we do have a little bit of time for some questions. If there's any questions, there are mics, in the...
Thank you very much, Professor. I've always heard so much about you, and it is my first time really seeing you having a lecture, and I have to say I'm really inspired. So thank you very much for a very good presentation. My question is the fact that from all your lecture, I say we have to electrify everything. That is very, very important. But we also know that when you're electrifying and your source of electrification is carbon-based, it's not renewable, then you also have huge problems with the CO2 emissions. We're looking about the aluminum production using inert anode ion, using inert anode. Basically, the energy input is going to be higher because you don't have carbon. So my question is, what is your take on electrifying when you are looking at carbon-based and then renewables? Thank you very much.
Well, I think ultimately people want to go to carbon-free production of electricity as well. And that doesn't mean solar and wind only. We have fantastic examples here in Canada with hydroelectric power. Anything that can be generated by hydroelectricity should be done. But even that, I said the 21st century is going to make it harder and harder. There are many places today. You could, my guess is, you can argue that I'm wrong, but my guess is that the James Bay project might not go forward if it were started today because of the amount of flooding and so on and so forth. But it's there, got it, good. So there's that. You have nuclear fission as well. Both high power, high energy density, small footprint, and so on. But the carbon consumption right now to generate electricity, yeah, we're living with it for the foreseeable future. So what's the correct question to be posed? What's wrong with burning coal? What's wrong with burning coal? You generate heat, you boil the water, and the steam turns the turbine, blah, 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 blah. So what's wrong? What's wrong? It's the CO2 emission. So why don't we stop the CO2 emission? Instead, the simple knee-jerk reaction is forbid the burning of coal. Well, that's a way. You want to stop all emissions? Close down the entire world economy. The CO2 emissions will stop. I don't know if that's socially acceptable, but it's very effective. So, I'm saying that's one of the things I'm doing in one of the companies I started when I left MIT. I started Sadoway Labs, skunk works for wild ideas. So one of the ideas I'm working on is destruction of CO2, not carbon capture. That's another dead end. No, it's got to be carbon conversion, destruction, turn it into solid that you can inventory and so on. So yeah, it's a tough problem.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? There are a few mics. Yep, I see one over there.
Professor Sadoway, thank you again for such a motivational talk. And as one of your former students, it was good to see you up there again.
I recognize you.
Yeah, I know, I'm in trouble.
And you too have changed.
Yes, I have. True that.
But you know what I recognize? I did. The first thing, this is the truth. I don't lie. This is the truth. I recognized his voice. I recognized his voice. I looked at his face, and I did this, reconstruction, and did roll back in time. Bingo, there he is.
Yeah, a long time. Yeah, so I'm Bill McDonald. I work
I know you're Bill McDonald.
Maybe
I'm Donald Sadoway.
Yes, I know. And, currently I'm working for a large international metals company.
Yes.
Which makes nickel and titanium. And we see a lot of inquiries for materials of construction, for advanced energy related to nuclear, geothermal, electrolytic. And they're coming to us because there's a materials challenge. I don't see that being discussed in the sense that we are sort of at the limits of our capability in terms of temperature, environmental resistance, corrosion for many of these new technologies. So is that on the agenda for professors or MIT or around the world to look at new materials of construction, or do you think we have what we have and we just have to live with it?
Now this is again my reflecting on how things really work. And so the university is essentially a Renaissance institution where the professor can do anything he or she wants to do, provided they have a sponsor. Right? So where's the sponsor? Sponsors in Ottawa, sponsors in Washington, or maybe in the private sector. So let me speak about Washington, because I know that better. I've spent most of my life now in the United States. And so a handful of people in Washington decide what they're going to fund. Now, when I started working on this metal stuff in the 80s, they were closing the US Department of Mines. And that meant the funding for metallurgy, because the Bureau of Mines had stations in Albany, Oregon, and Reno, Nevada. And these were research laboratories where prospectors could come with ore, and they would be subjected to testing and so on to try to, they were doing rare earth extraction in Nevada back in the 1950s and 60s. It all came to an end. And now you have the National Science Foundation, which, as the name implies, is science, very frou-frou science. And the Department of Energy, I call it the Department of Entropy. These people, they fund only, certain things. And so if they choose not to fund this sort of thing, then there's no money for it. So it's not that the professors don't recognize that there's a problem. That if you're a young professor, you're pre-tenure, you're thinking about, there's a fork in the road. This is really interesting. This is really important. But the other fork is, this is au courant. I can get funded in this, even though I think it's kind of stupid. But people are funding it. And so I need to get the publications or I'm going to get fired. So that's what happens. So I don't think that we've hit the limit in terms of materials that can perform as reactors at elevated temperatures. But, it's just not, it's not sexy. And, even look at the fantastic changes that have happened just in the past 10 years in the other sectors. I mean, the stuff that I'm getting published in Nature. When they published that inert anode paper in 2013, at that time, Nature published maybe one paper per decade in the area of extracted metallurgy. They published the one FFC process for titanium. That was 2000 or something like that, and then nothing. And then finally, the Nobel Committee. I was so elated when in 2019, they gave the Nobel Prize in Chemistry to John Goodenough, Stan Whittingham, and Akira Yoshino for the lithium-ion battery. They never gave something for applied science. If you wanted to win Nobel Prize, you had to discover a new particle. You didn't get a Nobel Prize for this, except in life science. Life science, so CRISPR got it. CRISPR got, it should have been in medicine. But if you're working in life science, you get 2 shots. You get Nobel Prize in medicine, or you can steal the Nobel Prize in chemistry. Right? But for real chemistry, the chemistry that we need for society, that's not pure enough. So there's all of this stuff going on. You make me Secretary of Energy, you'll see change.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I know we're getting to the coffee break. Maybe one last question from the audience, if any burning questions? Well, there's a mic right there.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. It's very short. I mean, you just said something. People go for what gets funded and published even when it's stupid. Can we use that quote? Because it can be very useful when you talk with people when you try to get funding.
I told you, as someone who's no longer in the university, I can say anything I want. I said it. I'm not going to deny it. Look, I'll give you an example. All right, so I don't care if I'm offending people. I didn't come to offend, but I do speak truth. So this is about 2 years ago at this time. I have these other ideas on new battery chemistries. We still have many pockets of need. There's not one battery. The battery that powers the hearing aid is not the battery that should be storing energy for at Moss Landing. It's definitely not lithium-ion. We know. They closed the Pacific Coast Highway because of the fire at Moss Landing. And by the way, it wasn't the flames, it was the fumes. The fumes from a lithium-ion battery will kill you. So, Jennifer Granholm, who is the Secretary of Energy, comes to the microphone one day and announces flow batteries of the future. And I just said, you got to be kidding. You can't say that. You can't say that. Who's telling her this? So this kind of pronouncement is a killer for innovation. Because now I've got this really cool idea for an advanced thing. It's locally sourced, unflammable, price point correct, and so on. But it's not a flow battery. And the Secretary of Energy just said it's flow batteries of the future. This is the kind of stuff that's just, that's it. And now you have all these people making flow batteries. No. This, I will tell you that the dearth of innovation in the battery sector is a testimony to the failure of imagination. The failure of imagination. Right? But you can't do something if you don't have the financial resources to go into the lab and at least test the hypothesis. So some people are hampered by resource constraints. Other people have money. And you look at how they spend it and you say, that's the choice.
Well,
that's a really happy note to end on.
Yeah, I know. Well, thank you very much again, Professor Sadoway. As always, you inspire us and remind us the importance of fundamentals. And obviously a lot of technical people, so the fundamentals are important. And then connecting the dots and thinking outside the box and.